Zoos are meant to be places of wonder and education, but sometimes they become scenes of tragedy. While rare, some visitors have met horrifying fates due to accidents, animal attacks, or human error. These disturbing deaths are grim reminders of the unpredictable nature of wild animals, even in captivity. Let's rewind to a crisp November day in 2012 at the Pittsburgh Zoo and PPG Aquarium, a place where families go for laughs, awe, and maybe a few roars from behind the glass. Among the visitors that day were Elizabeth Durkovich and her 2-year-old son Maddox. Maddox wasn't just any kid, he was a curious, energetic little boy with a love for trucks and all things wild. Like many toddlers, he was fascinated by animals, and when the pair approached the African painted dog exhibit home to a pack of powerful, fast, and highly predatory canines, it must have felt like walking into a real-life jungle scene. What happened next still sends shivers down spines. Elizabeth, trying to help her son get a better look at the action, lifted him onto the railing. It was something countless parents have probably done in zoos around the world, hoisting a child up to see better, just for a moment. But that one moment turned into unimaginable horror. Maddox suddenly lost his balance, slipped, and fell first, bouncing off a net that was designed to catch dropped objects, not small children, and plunged nearly 14 feet into the enclosure below. Within seconds, the African painted dogs swarmed him. These animals, while smaller than lions or tigers, are efficient pack hunters with razor-sharp instincts. Zoo staff and first responders did what they could. Some tried to lure the dogs away. Others shouted and threw things to distract them. A police officer ultimately fired a shot, killing one of the dogs that refused to retreat. But it was tragically too late. The autopsy later revealed that Maddox had survived the fall, but died quickly from the severe injuries caused by the attack. The incident was both a heartbreaking accident and a lightning rod for controversy. The public reacted with a mix of grief, outrage, and finger-pointing. Was it the mother's fault? Was it a lapse in zoo safety? Should the enclosure have been designed differently? Allegheny County prosecutors ultimately ruled it a tragic accident and declined to file criminal charges, but that didn't stop a storm of civil litigation. Maddox's parents filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the zoo, citing past internal safety reports that had warned about visitors lifting children over railings, warnings that were reportedly not followed up with any design changes. In response, the zoo filed its own claim, arguing that the mother bore full responsibility for the fall. Eventually, a confidential settlement was reached, but the impact of that day went far beyond the courtroom. The African painted dog exhibit was permanently shut down, and the dogs were relocated. The area was later transformed into a cheetah enclosure, perhaps a quieter, more controlled setting. In the midst of grief, something beautiful emerged. Maddox's family started a movement called Trucks for Maddox, where people donated toy trucks to children in hospitals and charities honoring the boy's love for his favorite toys. His memory, though tied to an unthinkable tragedy, lives on through the kindness of strangers and the changes made to prevent another accident like this. The story of Maddox Durkovich serves as a sobering reminder. Zoos, for all their fun and wonder, house wild animals, and even a momentary lapse can have irreversible consequences. It's a tale of love, loss, and the very human need to reflect and learn from tragedy, especially when innocent lives are involved. It was a hot and hazy afternoon in September 2014 at the National Zoological Park in Delhi. The usual crowd of families, tourists, and snack-hunting monkeys filled the place. Kids were buzzing with excitement. Parents were trying to keep them from climbing into cages. And somewhere in the background, ice creams were melting faster than tempers. Amid this zoo, chaos walked a 20-year-old man named Maxud Khan. He was barefoot, wearing shabby clothes, and appeared disoriented. According to some witnesses, he had been wandering alone for a while, looking confused. Maxud ended up near the enclosure of one of the zoo's star attractions, a majestic male white tiger named VJ. The tiger enclosure had a small barrier that looked more like a polite suggestion than an actual safety measure. With barely a waist-high fence to keep people back, it was practically an invitation to disaster. Whether Maxud climbed over intentionally or simply slipped is something no one could confirm with certainty. But in a matter of seconds, he found himself inside the enclosure, having fallen about 18 feet down into the dry moat that separated humans from one of nature's most formidable predators. What followed was a scene straight out of a surreal movie. The tiger approached slowly, not immediately aggressive, just alert and curious. For a tense few minutes, the giant cat and the terrified man stared at each other, Maxud crouched against the wall of the moat, frozen with fear. People above began screaming. Some yelled at the tiger, some threw rocks and sticks, probably thinking they were helping. Others did what 21st century people often do during a crisis. They pulled out their phones and started filming. It was absolute mayhem. But for Vijay the tiger, the situation had shifted. The loud noises, the flying debris, the agitation from above all of it seemed to trigger his instincts. Within moments, he pounced. The crowd erupted in horror as the white tiger attacked Maxud with terrifying speed and force. Some reports said the tiger dragged him around for several minutes. Others claimed the death was almost instantaneous. Either way, zoo officials failed to respond in time to prevent the tragedy. By the time help arrived, Maxud was already dead. The public outrage that followed was immediate and intense. People questioned how anyone could access a tiger enclosure so easily. Many wondered why the zoo had such low safety railings, especially around a predator's exhibit. Others criticized the staff for having no tranquilizer guns ready or emergency protocol in place. It became a storm of accusations, debates, and sensational media coverage. Some reports painted Maxud as mentally ill and vulnerable, someone who had fallen through the cracks of society. Others portrayed him as reckless or suicidal. But beyond the speculation, one truth stood tall: the zoo had failed on multiple levels to protect both the animal and the visitor. Surprisingly, the white tiger was not harmed in the aftermath. Animal rights groups stepped in immediately, reminding everyone that Vijay was simply reacting as any wild animal would. He had not escaped. He had not attacked unprovoked. He was in his home, and a human had trespassed into it. The authorities agreed, and the tiger was spared. He remained at the zoo, still majestic, still deadly, and now even more famous. This incident forced a national conversation about zoo safety standards, mental health awareness, and our fascination with wild animals. It became a grim reminder that no matter how many signs we post or fences we build, the wild does not forgive human error. Maxud Khan's death was a tragedy that could have been prevented with stronger barriers, better planning, and a lot more attention to public safety. His story, captured on shaky phone cameras and broadcast to the world, remains a haunting example of what happens when human negligence meets raw, unfiltered nature. Zoos are usually places of laughter, school trips, and awkward penguin photos, not biblical reenactments gone tragically wrong. But on May 21, 2016, the Santiago Metropolitan Zoo in Chile became the scene of a deeply unsettling and controversial incident. A 20-year-old man named Franco Luis Farada climbed into the lion enclosure in what appeared to be a suicide attempt, or, as some speculated, a religiously fueled delusion. What followed was a chain of events that shook the country, sparked international outrage, and raised tough questions about mental health, animal rights, and emergency protocols. It began like something out of a surreal novel. Farada reportedly stripped naked, climbed over a safety barrier, and entered the enclosure housing 3 lions. Witnesses later said he shouted religious phrases and seemed to believe he was reenacting the biblical story of Daniel, the guy who hung out with lions and walked away without a scratch. Sadly, this wasn't a Sunday school tale. The lions, behaving as lions do, attacked Farada almost immediately. Zookeepers were thrown into a horrible dilemma. Tranquilizers take time to work, and Farada's life was in immediate danger. With no time to spare, the zoo staff made a decision they later called devastating but necessary. They fatally shot 2 of the lions, a male and a female, who had been long-term residents of the zoo. A 3rd lioness managed to retreat and survived. Farada was critically injured, suffering severe trauma to his head, chest, and pelvis, but he lived. He was placed in a medically induced coma and later began a slow recovery. The aftermath was an emotional firestorm. Chileans were heartbroken and furious, not necessarily at Farada, but at the fact that 2 beloved animals had been killed to save a man who had willingly put himself in harm's way. Animal rights activists staged protests outside the zoo, held candlelight vigils, and demanded accountability. Some called for better mental health support systems, others for improved zoo security, or even the closure of the facility altogether. Farada's backstory added layers to the tragedy. He had reportedly struggled with his mental health and carried a note referencing apocalyptic visions and divine destiny signed Jesus. It painted a picture of a young man in profound distress, lost in a dangerous delusion. The incident reignited debates about how society handles mental illness, particularly when it leads to public crises with irreversible consequences. Meanwhile, the zoo, already under scrutiny for previous incidents involving animal welfare, found itself in hot water. Critics slammed its emergency protocols, questioned the adequacy of its security barriers, and called for reforms in how zoos handle both people and animals in high-risk situations. The zoo director defended the actions taken, emphasizing that staff did everything they could to save a human life, but admitted the emotional toll was massive. "We are deeply affected," she said. "We had to sacrifice 2 animals that were part of our family." In the end, the Santiago Zoo incident was more than just a bizarre headline. It was a tragic convergence of mental illness, human error, and institutional pressure. 2 majestic animals lost their lives, a young man nearly died, and an entire nation was left wrestling with what the right decision even means in a moment of chaos. It's a haunting reminder that real life doesn't always give us neat answers, just hard questions, and hopefully, the resolve to do better next time. It's not every day that you hear about a fatal kangaroo attack in the United States. In fact, it's almost unheard of, but that's exactly what happened in May 2025 in Loris, South Carolina. A 52-year-old man named Eric Slate tragically lost his life after an encounter with a kangaroo at a local petting zoo. It sounds like something pulled from a strange headline generator, but it's a very real and sobering reminder of how unpredictable and dangerous even tame animals can be. The incident took place at 5 Star Farms, a family-run petting zoo where visitors could interact with animals like goats, wallabies, and, yes, kangaroos. Eric Slate wasn't just any visitor, he was the brother of the zoo's owner, Robert Slate, and had spent plenty of time around the animals. According to local reports, Eric had previously gone into the kangaroo enclosure multiple times, sometimes engaging in light roughhousing with one of the farm's resident kangaroos, a large red kangaroo affectionately known by locals as Mr. Jack. But on the night of May 9th, things took a tragic turn. At some point that evening, Eric entered the enclosure again, presumably thinking it would be just another playful interaction. Unfortunately, it wasn't. When he didn't return for some time, others went to check on him. That's when his body was discovered inside the pen, lifeless, with clear signs of trauma. The Horry County coroner later confirmed that. Eric had died from multiple blunt force injuries consistent with an animal attack. While authorities didn't explicitly say the kangaroo was the attacker, the circumstances made it heartbreakingly obvious. Kangaroos, while often seen as quirky, hopping mascots of Australia, can be incredibly strong and territorial, especially the big males. They're built like bodybuilders with legs that can shatter bones and claws that can do real damage if they feel threatened. And in this case, what was probably meant to be harmless fun may have been interpreted by the kangaroo as a challenge or threat. The news shocked both locals and people across the country, not just for the tragedy itself, but because of how incredibly rare such incidents are. In fact, fatal kangaroo attacks are almost non-existent in the U.S., and even in Australia, where kangaroos outnumber people, deaths from these marsupials are staggeringly rare. The last confirmed kangaroo-related death in Australia happened back in 1936. The farm quickly came under scrutiny. Authorities began inspecting the enclosures, evaluating animal safety, and conducting a full investigation to make sure no negligence had occurred. But Robert Slate, the owner and grieving brother, assured the public that the animals were secure and there was no danger to visitors. The kangaroo involved wasn't euthanized and remains at the farm, now the quiet center of a deeply unfortunate story. This incident sparked a broader conversation about exotic animal ownership, petting zoo safety, and how even well-meaning interactions with wild animals can end unpredictably. It's easy to forget that animals like kangaroos, even when raised in captivity, still have instincts that don't always mix well with human playfulness. Eric Slate's death is a tragic loss that left his family and community reeling. And while it may sound surreal, it serves as a powerful reminder. Wild animals, no matter how familiar they may seem, deserve our respect, not our roughhousing. In the early hours of December 17, 2024, a shocking and deeply tragic incident occurred at Lion Park, a private zoo nestled in the Parkent district of Uzbekistan's Tashkent region. F. Iriskulov, a 44-year-old zookeeper working the night shift, was found dead inside the lion enclosure in what turned out to be one of the most horrifying animal-related incidents in the country in recent years. According to reports from investigators and local media, the entire event unfolded between 5 and 9 in the morning, during a time when the zoo was still closed to the public and only a handful of staff were on site. At some point in the early morning, Iriskulov entered the lion enclosure. It's still not entirely clear what prompted him to do so, but various accounts suggest he may have been attempting to record a video with the lions, potentially as a way to impress his fiancée. This speculation emerged after investigators reviewed his phone and found that he may have been trying to capture footage of himself close to the animals. However, it's also possible that he was simply trying to interact with them, perhaps assuming that familiarity and routine would protect him. Unfortunately, his decision coincided with a critical safety failure. The cage door had reportedly been left unsecured, allowing 3 lions to access the outer yard freely. When Iriskulov entered the enclosure, he was not dealing with sleepy, tame creatures. These were full-grown lions, strong, unpredictable, and extremely dangerous. As he tried to approach or redirect them, one or more of the lions turned aggressive. He was attacked, mauled, and ultimately killed. Investigators later confirmed that his body had been partially consumed, and initial forensic reports estimated the attack happened just minutes after he entered. With no other staff nearby at the time, there was no one to intervene. His remains were only discovered hours later by a colleague arriving for the morning shift at around 9 a.m. The response was immediate. Emergency services and law enforcement were called to the scene, and a criminal investigation was opened under Uzbekistan's labor and workplace safety regulations. 2 of the lions were quickly located and tranquilized by specialists from the Tashkent Zoo. The 3rd lion, however, had become extremely aggressive and was shot and killed by a local hunter who had been brought in to neutralize the threat. Officials also launched a full-scale inspection of Lion Park's facilities, enclosures, and operational procedures. Experts from the Ministry of Ecology were dispatched to conduct a thorough audit, including checks on all animal enclosures and staff training protocols. What raised further concern was the nature of Lion Park itself. Unlike traditional zoos, this facility operated as a contact zoo, where visitors and staff often had closer than usual access to the animals. These types of attractions, while popular for offering exotic animal encounters, walk a fine line when it comes to safety. Allowing untrained or minimally supervised personnel to interact directly with predators like lions is a recipe for disaster, as this incident painfully demonstrated. The case remains under investigation, with legal proceedings expected to focus on negligence, improper safety procedures, and potential breaches of animal handling regulations. Authorities are also reviewing whether the park should continue operating at all. For the public and for zoo professionals, the incident is a grim reminder of the fine line between fascination and folly. Wild animals, no matter how accustomed they may seem to human presence, are still wild. Respect, distance, and strict safety measures are not optional. They are essential, and when those lines are crossed, the consequences can be fatal.